They laughed at my faded uniform, until the president asked to meet me. Chapter 1. The Mockery. The morning sun cast long shadows across the Pentagon's vast parking lot as Staff Sergeant Michael "Ghost" Thompson stepped out of his weather pickup truck. His boots hit the asphalt with a soft thud, and he adjusted the straps of his worn duffel bag. The building before him stood like a monument to American military power, its imposing facade reflecting the early light with an almost intimidating brilliance. Michael's uniform told a story that few would bother to read. The desert camouflage pattern had been faded by countless deployments under scorching Middle Eastern suns. The fabric was soft from years of wear, and though it was clean and pressed, it couldn't hide the fact that it had seen better days. Small repairs were visible if you looked closely enough. Tiny patches where shrapnel had torn through, expertly mended by his own hands during quiet moments between missions. At 32 years old, Michael had spent the last 14 years of his life in the service of his country. His face bore the weathered look of someone who'd seen too much, but his eyes still held the sharp intelligence that had made him one of the most effective special operations soldiers in the Army. His brown hair was cut in a regulation fade, and his posture was straight despite the weight of exhaustion that seemed to follow him everywhere. As he approached the main entrance, Michael couldn't help but notice the stark contrast between his appearance and that of the other personnel entering the building. Pentagon staff officers walked by in crisp, pristine uniforms, their brass polished to a mirror shine, their boots gleaming like black glass. Many of them were desk warriors, capable soldiers, no doubt, but men and women who had spent their careers in air-conditioned offices rather than desert outposts. The security checkpoint was busy with the morning rush. Michael joined the line, fishing his military ID from his pocket. The card was as worn as his uniform, the edges slightly frayed from years of use. Behind him, he could hear the whispered conversations of other soldiers, but he paid them no mind. He had learned long ago to tune out the noise of the world around him when necessary. Next, called the security guard, a middle-aged man with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. Michael stepped forward, presenting his ID with a slight nod. The guard examined it carefully, comparing the photo to the man standing before him. There was a moment of scrutiny, then a respectful nod. "Thank you, Sergeant Thompson. Have a good day." "You too, sir," Michael replied, his voice carrying the quiet confidence of someone comfortable in his own skin. As he collected his belongings after the security screening, Michael heard the first snickers. A group of 3 junior officers, all lieutenants by their rank insignia, were standing near the elevator bank. Their uniforms were immaculate, their brass gleaming, and their attitudes clearly reflected their belief in their own importance. "Look at that uniform," whispered the first lieutenant, a young man with perfectly styled hair and soft hands that had never held anything more dangerous than a pen. "Did he fish that out of a donation bin?" The second lieutenant, a woman with a sharp face and calculating eyes, joined in. "I bet he's one of those National Guard weekend warriors. Probably bought that uniform at a surplus store." The third officer, slightly older but no less arrogant, added his voice to the chorus. "Maybe he's lost. The VA office is across town." Their laughter was quiet but unmistakable, and Michael felt their eyes on him as he waited for the elevator. He had heard it all before. The assumptions, the judgments, the casual dismissal of those who didn't fit the Pentagon's polished image. It no longer surprised him, but it still stung. The elevator arrived with a soft ding, and Michael stepped inside along with several other personnel. The 3 lieutenants followed, still whispering among themselves. Michael pressed the button for the 3rd floor, where he was scheduled to meet with Colonel Sarah Martinez, his handler for the past 6 years. "Excuse me," said the 1st lieutenant, stepping closer to Michael. "What floor are you going to?" "3rd floor," Michael replied simply, not bothering to elaborate. The lieutenant exchanged a look with his companions. "3rd floor? That's where the important briefings happen. Are you sure you're supposed to be there?" Michael turned to face the young officer, his expression calm, but his eyes hard. "I'm sure. It's just that. Well, you look like you might be more comfortable in the commissary or maybe the motor pool," the lieutenant continued, his voice dripping with condescension. "The 3rd floor is for personnel with high-level clearances." The woman lieutenant smirked. Maybe he's delivering sandwiches to the real soldiers. Michael felt his jaw tighten, but he kept his voice level. I appreciate your concern, but I'm exactly where I need to be. The elevator reached the 3rd floor and opened with another soft ding. Michael stepped out, followed by the 3 lieutenants, who seemed genuinely surprised that he was actually getting off at their floor. Well, this should be interesting, muttered the older lieutenant as they walked down the corridor lined with offices and conference rooms. Michael made his way to conference room 3B, where he was scheduled to meet Colonel Martinez. The room was at the end of the hall, and he could see through the glass walls that it was already occupied by several high-ranking officers. As he approached, he noticed that the 3 lieutenants had followed him, their curiosity apparently getting the better of their judgment. He knocked on the door frame and waited for permission to enter. "Come in," called a familiar voice. Michael entered the room to find Colonel Martinez sitting at the head of a long conference table, surrounded by a collection of officers that represented some of the most important positions in the Army's Special Operations Command. There was Brigadier General James Morrison, a stern-faced man with silver hair and 3 decades of experience. Next to him sat Colonel Robert Hayes, the commanding officer of the 75th Ranger Regiment, and Major General Patricia Wells, one of the few women to achieve such a high rank in special operations. "Sergeant Thompson," Colonel Martinez said, standing to greet him. "Thank you for coming. Please have a seat." Michael nodded respectfully and took the chair that had been reserved for him at the table. He was acutely aware of the stares from the other officers, some curious, some skeptical, but all respectful. These were soldiers who understood that appearances could be deceiving, and they reserved their judgment for those who had proven themselves in combat. Behind him, through the glass wall, Michael could see the 3 lieutenants hovering in the hallway, their faces pressed against the glass as they tried to understand what was happening. "Gentlemen, ladies," Colonel Martinez began, addressing the room. "I'd like to introduce Staff Sergeant Michael Thompson, call sign Ghost." For those of you who don't know, Sergeant Thompson has been conducting deep cover operations for the past 6 years, primarily in Afghanistan and Iraq, but also in several other locations that remain classified. Brigadier General Morrison leaned forward, his interest clearly piqued. 6 years, deep cover? That's an impressive commitment, Sergeant. "Thank you, sir," Michael replied. "It's been an honor to serve." Colonel Hayes spoke up next. "I've read your file, Thompson. Your work in the Kandahar province was exceptional. The intelligence you provided saved a lot of lives." "I was just doing my job, sir," Michael said, though there was a hint of pride in his voice. Major General Wells nodded approvingly. "Modesty is a virtue, Sergeant, but false modesty serves no one. Your contributions to our operations have been invaluable." Colonel Martinez opened a folder on the table before her. "Sergeant Thompson, the reason we've called you here today is that we have a situation that requires your particular set of skills. However, before we proceed, I need to inform you that this mission would be unlike anything you've done before." Michael straightened in his chair. "I'm listening, ma'am." "This mission would require you to operate not in a foreign country, but here in the United States. There's a domestic terrorism cell that has been planning an attack on a major American city, and traditional law enforcement has been unable to penetrate their organization." Brigadier General Morrison picked up the briefing. "This group has been extremely careful about their recruitment and operations. They only trust individuals with specific backgrounds and experiences. You fit their profile perfectly." "What kind of profile, sir?" Michael asked. "Veterans who appear to have been forgotten by the system," Colonel Martinez explained. "Soldiers who look like they've been through hell and come back broken. Men and women who might have reason to feel betrayed by their country." Michael understood immediately. His worn uniform, his weathered appearance, his quiet demeanor, all of it would make him an ideal candidate for recruitment by a domestic terrorist organization looking to exploit disaffected veterans. "The mission would be extremely dangerous," Major General Wells continued. "You will be completely on your own, with no backup and no direct communication with us. If you're discovered, we would have to disavow any knowledge of your activities." "How long would the mission last?" Michael asked. "We estimate 6 months to a year," Colonel Martinez replied. "Maybe longer, depending on how quickly you can gain their trust and gather the intelligence we need." Michael was quiet for a moment, considering the implications. A year undercover with domestic terrorists, with no backup and no way to communicate with his handlers. It was perhaps the most dangerous mission he had ever been offered. "Sergeant," Brigadier General Morrison said, "I want you to understand that this is entirely voluntary. No one would question your decision if you chose to decline. You've already given more than enough to your country." Through the glass wall, Michael could see the three lieutenants still hovering in the hallway, their faces filled with confusion and growing concern. They had followed him expecting to see him embarrassed or thrown out of the building, but instead they were witnessing something they couldn't comprehend. "I'll do it," Michael said without hesitation. "When do I start?" Colonel Martinez smiled. "I was hoping you'd say that. But before we proceed with the mission briefing, there's something else I need to tell you." She paused, glancing around the table at the other officers before continuing. "Sergeant Thompson, your previous missions have not gone unnoticed at the highest levels of government. The intelligence you've provided has been instrumental in preventing several terrorist attacks, and your work has saved countless American lives." Michael felt a flush of pride, but he remained silent, waiting for her to continue. 3 days ago, I received a call from the White House," Colonel Martinez said, her voice carrying a weight that made everyone in the room sit up straighter. "The President of the United States has specifically requested to meet with you." The room fell silent. Michael felt as if the air had been sucked out of his lungs. The President wanted to meet with him? It seemed impossible. "I'm sorry, ma'am," Michael said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Could you repeat that?" "The President wants to meet with you, Sergeant," Brigadier General Morrison confirmed. "He's been briefed on your service record and your contributions to national security, and he wants to personally thank you for your service." Michael's mind reeled. He thought of all the times he had been dismissed, ignored, or treated as invisible because of his worn uniform and unremarkable appearance. He thought of the countless nights he had spent in foreign countries, risking his life for a country that often seemed to forget about soldiers like him. "When?" he managed to ask. "Tomorrow afternoon," Colonel Martinez replied. "The meeting is scheduled for 2 p.m. in the Oval Office." Major General Wells leaned forward. "Sergeant, I want you to understand what this means. Presidents don't meet with staff sergeants very often. This is recognition at the highest level for your extraordinary service." Through the glass wall, Michael could see that the three lieutenants had been joined by several other officers, all of them staring into the conference room with expressions of shock and disbelief. Word was clearly spreading through the Pentagon that something extraordinary was happening. "There's more," Colonel Martinez continued. "The President is also going to present you with the Distinguished Service Cross for your actions during Operation Silent Thunder in Afghanistan. It's the second highest military decoration for valor, and it's long overdue." Michael felt overwhelmed. The Distinguished Service Cross was an honor he had never imagined receiving. Operation Silent Thunder had been a classified mission where he had spent 3 months embedded with a Taliban cell, gathering intelligence that had led to the dismantling of an entire terrorist network. The mission had nearly cost him his life on multiple occasions, but he had always considered it just another job. "I don't know what to say," Michael admitted. "You don't have to say anything," Colonel Hayes said with a smile. "Just be proud of what you've accomplished. You've served your country with distinction, and tomorrow the President is going to make sure the whole world knows it." The meeting continued for another hour, with the officers briefing Michael on the protocol for his White House visit and discussing the details of his upcoming mission. As they talked, Michael became aware of a growing commotion outside the conference room. More and more personnel were gathering in the hallway, all of them trying to get a glimpse of what was happening inside. When the meeting finally ended, Michael stood to leave, but Colonel Martinez called him back. "Sergeant," she said, "I want you to know that I've had the honor of working with some of the finest soldiers in the Army, but I've never worked with anyone quite like you. Your dedication, your courage, and your selflessness are truly exceptional." "Thank you, ma'am," Michael replied. "It's been an honor to serve under your command." As he prepared to leave the room, Brigadier General Morrison stood and extended his hand. "Sergeant Thompson, it's been a privilege to meet you. I look forward to hearing about your White House visit. Michael shook hands with each of the officers, accepting their congratulations and their thanks. Then he walked to the door, took a deep breath, and stepped out into the hallway. The corridor was now packed with personnel, all of them staring at him with a mixture of curiosity and newfound respect. Word had spread quickly through the Pentagon that the scruffy soldier in the faded uniform was someone very special indeed. Near the elevator, Michael spotted the 3 lieutenants who had mocked him earlier. Their faces were pale, and they looked like they wanted to disappear into the floor. The first lieutenant, the one who had suggested Michael was lost, stepped forward hesitantly. "Sergeant Thompson," he said, his voice barely audible. We owe you an apology." Michael looked at the young officer for a long moment. He could see the genuine remorse in his eyes, the understanding that he had made a terrible mistake in judgment. "No apology necessary, Lieutenant," Michael said quietly. "Just remember that you can't judge a soldier by his uniform. Some of us have been places where keeping your brass polished isn't the top priority." The lieutenant nodded, his face flushed with embarrassment. "Yes, sir. I'll remember that." As Michael walked toward the elevator, the crowd of personnel parted before him. Some nodded respectfully, others simply stared, but all of them now understood that they were in the presence of someone extraordinary. The elevator arrived, and Michael stepped inside alone. As the doors closed, he caught a glimpse of his reflection in the polished metal. He still looked the same, worn uniform, weathered face, tired eyes. But something had changed. The weight of recognition, of validation, of finally being seen for who he really was, had lifted a burden from his shoulders that he hadn't even realized he was carrying. The drive from the Pentagon to the White House took exactly 23 minutes through the midday Washington traffic. Michael sat in the back of the black sedan, his dress uniform crisp and perfect, his boots polished to a mirror shine. For this occasion, he had worn his dress blues, the formal military uniform reserved for the most important ceremonies and occasions. The transformation from his faded combat uniform to his dress blues was striking. The dark blue jacket was adorned with ribbons and medals that told the story of his service. The Purple Heart with 2 oak leaf clusters, the Bronze Star with V device for valor, the Combat Infantryman badge, and numerous campaign ribbons representing deployments to Afghanistan, Iraq, and other classified locations. His trousers were pressed to perfection, and his white shirt was immaculate. But even in his finest uniform, Michael felt the same nervous energy that had accompanied him on every dangerous mission. Meeting the President of the United States was perhaps more intimidating than infiltrating a terror cell. His driver, a young Marine corporal named Rodriguez, glanced at him in the rearview mirror. "First time at the White House, Sergeant?" "Yes, it is," Michael replied, straightening his tie for the 10th time. "Don't worry, sir. The president is, well, he's the president, but he's also a regular person. He'll put you at ease." Michael nodded, appreciating the young Marine's attempt to calm his nerves. "Thank you, Corporal." As they approached the White House, Michael was struck by the magnitude of the moment. The iconic building rose before them, its white columns and manicured lawn representing the power and dignity of the American presidency. Security was tight, with Secret Service agents visible at every checkpoint and rooftop snipers silhouetted against the clear blue sky. The sedan pulled up to the West Wing entrance, where a Secret Service agent in a dark suit was waiting. Michael stepped out of the vehicle, adjusting his uniform jacket one final time. "Sergeant Thompson?" the agent asked, extending his hand. "I'm Agent Williams. I'll be escorting you to the Oval Office." "Thank you, sir," Michael replied, shaking the agent's hand. They walked through the famous West Wing corridors, past offices where some of the most important decisions in American history had been made. Michael noticed the portraits of former presidents lining the walls, their painted eyes seeming to follow his progress. "The president is running just a few minutes behind schedule," Agent Williams explained as they approached the Oval Office. "He's in a meeting with the Secretary of Defense, but they should be finishing up shortly." They stopped outside the iconic door, and Michael felt his heart rate increase. Behind that door was the most powerful person in the world, and in a few minutes he would be alone with him. "Sergeant Thompson," Agent Williams said, I want you to know that the president specifically requested this meeting. He's been briefed on your service record, and he's genuinely excited to meet you." Before Michael could respond, the door opened, and the Secretary of Defense emerged, followed by 2 aides. The secretary, a distinguished woman in her 60s, nodded politely to Michael as she passed. "The president will see you now," Agent Williams said, opening the door wider. Michael stepped into the Oval Office and immediately felt the weight of history surrounding him. The room was smaller than he had expected, but every detail spoke of power and tradition. The presidential seal was woven into the blue carpet, and the famous Resolute desk sat beneath tall windows that looked out onto the South Lawn. President James Richardson stood up from behind his desk, a warm smile spreading across his face. At 55, he was a tall man with graying hair and kind eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. He wore a navy blue suit with the American flag pin on his lapel, and his manner was both dignified and approachable. "Sergeant Thompson," the president said, walking around his desk with his hand extended. "It's an honor to meet you." "The honor is mine, Mr. President," Michael replied, shaking hands with the leader of the free world. "Please, have a seat," the president said, gesturing to one of the couches arranged around a coffee table. "Can I offer you something to drink? Coffee? Water?" "Coffee would be great, sir," Michael said, settling into the couch. The president pressed a button on a small device, and within moments, a White House steward appeared with a tray containing 2 cups of coffee and a small plate of cookies. "Thank you, James," the president said to the steward, who disappeared as quietly as he had arrived. President Richardson sat down across from Michael, leaning forward slightly. "Sergeant, I have to tell you, I've been looking forward to this meeting for weeks. I've read your file, and I've been briefed on your service, but I wanted to hear from you personally about your experiences." Michael was surprised by the president's informal manner. Despite being in the most formal office in America, the conversation felt natural and comfortable. "Thank you, Mr. President. I'm honored by your interest in my service. Tell me about Operation Silent Thunder," the president said, his expression growing serious. "I understand it was a particularly dangerous mission." Michael took a sip of his coffee, organizing his thoughts. "It was a deep-cover operation, sir. I spent 3 months embedded with a Taliban cell in the Kandahar province. The intelligence we gathered led to the disruption of several planned attacks against American forces." 3 months, the president repeated. "That's a long time to be completely on your own, surrounded by enemies." "Yes, sir. It was challenging, but the mission was successful, and we were able to save lives. That made it worth it." The president nodded thoughtfully. "I understand you've been conducting similar operations for the past 6 years. That's an extraordinary commitment, Sergeant." "It's my job, sir. I'm honored to serve my country in whatever capacity is needed." "But it's more than just a job, isn't it?" the president asked. "The sacrifices you've made, the risks you've taken, the time you've spent away from family and friends, that goes beyond duty." Michael was quiet for a moment, considering his response. "Mr. President, I've seen what happens when good people don't stand up to evil. I've seen the cost of freedom, and I've seen what we're fighting to protect. If my service can help keep America safe, then every sacrifice is worth it." The president smiled, clearly moved by Michael's words. "That's exactly the kind of attitude that makes this country strong. You represent the very best of what it means to be an American soldier." They talked for another 20 minutes, discussing Michael's various missions, his thoughts on the current state of global security, and his plans for the future. The president proved to be an excellent listener, asking thoughtful questions and showing genuine interest in Michael's experiences. Finally, the president stood up. "Sergeant Thompson, I asked you here today not just to thank you for your service, but to present you with something that's long overdue." He walked to his desk and picked up a blue velvet box. "By the authority vested in me as President of the United States, I hereby present you with a Distinguished Service Cross for extraordinary heroism in connection with military operations against an armed enemy." Michael stood at attention as the president opened the box, revealing the distinguished medal, a bronze cross with an eagle in the center, suspended from a blue, white, and red ribbon. This medal recognizes your extraordinary courage during Operation Silent Thunder and your consistent bravery throughout your career," the president continued. "Your actions have saved countless American lives and contributed significantly to our national security." The president stepped forward and pinned the medal to Michael's uniform, then stepped back and saluted. Michael returned the salute, his eyes misting with emotion. "Thank you, Mr. President. This is the greatest honor of my life." "You've earned it, Sergeant. Every bit of it." The president walked to his desk and picked up a leather folder. "There's something else I want to give you. This is a personal letter of commendation from me to you. I want you to know that your service has been noticed and appreciated at the highest levels of government." Michael accepted the folder with trembling hands. "Thank you, sir. I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything. Just continue to serve with the same dedication and courage you've shown throughout your career." As their meeting drew to a close, the president walked Michael to the door. "Sergeant, I understand you're being considered for another mission. I want you to know that you have my complete confidence and support." "Thank you, Mr. President. I won't let you down. I know you won't. You never have." Agent Williams was waiting outside the Oval Office to escort Michael back to his vehicle. As they walked through the West Wing corridors, Michael felt like he was floating. The weight of the Distinguished Service Cross on his chest seemed to anchor him to reality, but everything else felt surreal. "How did it go?" Agent Williams asked as they reached the exit. "Better than I ever could have imagined," Michael replied. The drive back to the Pentagon was quiet, giving Michael time to process what had just happened. He thought about the 3 lieutenants who had mocked his faded uniform the day before, and he wondered what they would think if they could see him now. But more than that, he thought about all the soldiers who served quietly and without recognition, doing their jobs with dedication and courage despite never receiving the acknowledgement they deserved. When he arrived back at the Pentagon, word of his White House visit had already spread. Personnel throughout the building knew that the soldier in the faded uniform had been personally honored by the President of the United States. The transformation in how he was treated was immediate and profound. Colonel Martinez was waiting for him in her office, a broad smile on her face. "Well, how did it go?" Michael opened his uniform jacket, revealing the Distinguished Service Cross. "It was incredible, ma'am." The president. "He's a remarkable man. You deserve this recognition, Sergeant. You've earned every bit of it." "Thank you, ma'am. I'm ready for the next mission whenever you need me." Colonel Martinez nodded. "I know you are. But first, I think you should take some time to enjoy this moment. You've given so much to your country, and now your country has given something back to you." As Michael left the Pentagon that evening, he reflected on the extraordinary turn his life had taken. 24 hours earlier, he had been just another soldier in a faded uniform, dismissed and ignored by those who judged him by his appearance. Now, he was a hero recognized by the President of the United States, carrying the Distinguished Service Cross and the personal gratitude of the nation's leader. But perhaps most importantly, he had learned that true honor doesn't come from having a perfect uniform or polished brass. It comes from service, sacrifice, and the courage to do what's right, even when no one is watching. His faded uniform had been a badge of honor all along. He just hadn't realized it until others finally saw it too. The next morning, Michael returned to the Pentagon for his mission briefing. This time, when he walked through the corridors in his combat uniform, he walked with his head held high. The fabric was still faded, the patches still visible, but now everyone who saw him understood what those marks really represented: the price of freedom and the cost of keeping America safe. The 3 lieutenants who had mocked him were waiting by the elevator, but this time their expressions were very different. They stood at attention and saluted as he approached. "Good morning, Sergeant Thompson," the first lieutenant said respectfully. "Good morning, Lieutenant," Michael replied, returning the salute. As the elevator doors closed, Michael smiled to himself. Sometimes the most important battles are won not on foreign battlefields, but in the quiet moments when people choose to look beyond appearances and recognize the true worth of those who serve. His faded uniform had told a story of service and sacrifice. Now, finally, people were listening.